unlimited growth from all vantage points. Join your hosts, Kiana Wilberg and Fariza Hanif, as they dive deep into the heart of topical issues.
Hi there. Welcome to this week's episode of Starting Point. I am your host, Kiana Wilberg. Our guest today is one of the most respected voices in the political landscape. She is a veteran defender of our democracy, and she's a fierce advocate for women's leadership. I give to you the Honorable Minister of Parliamentary Affairs and Governance, the Honorable Gail Teixeira. Minister, welcome to the podcast. It's an honor to have you here.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Now, Minister, you are without question a political icon, and I would say our own Iron Lady. But before I dive into your accomplishments and your legacy, I want to get to know you, the preteen in the 1950s and 60s.
Yeah.
How would you describe young Teixeira back then and how she saw Guyana?
Yeah, well, I grew up here, and when my parents decided to emigrate when I was 14, it was very painful. I didn't want to leave, but it was the 60s with the violence. Mm-hmm. It was in 64 that my parents decided to emigrate, and so we left in 66. But the violence was terrible, and I was living in Working Rust area near the prison. That's where I was born, that area, and grew up in. And the violence, there was a lot of violence in that area as well. And so racial and robberies and things like that. So my parents decided it was time to go. But I hated leaving Guyana. And after I lived 10 years in Canada, I decided I'd finished high school, did university, did my degrees, 2 degrees, and then started my PhD and then decided, no, I can't do it anymore. I felt like a misfit, although Canada was good to me. I felt like a misfit, and I said, I'm going home. And my parents were horrified. And I came home alone with a metal trunk, a suitcase, and about $50 in my pocket, and came back to work with the People's Progressive Party.
But before we get to that, because I am interested in learning about that aspect of your life, what primary school, high school did you attend?
Sure.
And what was school life like? Tell us a bit about your parents, too.
Okay. Well, my parents both worked. My mother was the daughter of a British major, and a major in the British Army, who was posted here. Mm-hmm. And she came here when she was 3 years old, and when she left in 66, she lived all her life there until we left and went to Canada. My father was a descendant of a Portuguese indentured laborer from Madeira, from Funchal, and they both worked. They were very humble people. They didn't have, their main concern was raising their children and making sure they had education, and so they denied themselves a lot of stuff. And as I said, I grew up in Working Rust at George and Ben Street Junction, and it was a very interesting neighborhood to grow up in. And we children played all over the road. We had a great time. And the 60s became, 63, 64 became very painful because people started separating on the basis of race. But it was a working class area. And so one of my most painful memories is waking up at night and seeing the sky is orange. And realize my mother, who always was very protective, said, don't come outside, just stay. And what it was the Abrams house, which was on Hatfield Street around the corner from us, which burnt. And it is claimed that it was arson. The daughter of that was a member of the United Force at that time. And so it was very political, but 5 of the children died, and the father, and the mother, and 2 of the daughters lived. So it was very painful. I think I was about 10, to see this house, huge fires, and so that was one of my most. If I were to link politics and violence, that was the beginning of it, and then later, the looting and the pelting of people's houses in my neighborhood, with bricks and flambeaux. Flambeaux, and so it was a painful time. It was also a wonderful time in being a child and having a childhood. It was terrifying, and I went to St. Margaret's, where you asked which school I went to, and I did quite well there. And we used to walk back and forth every day. So people didn't have a lot of cars. My parents didn't have a car, and so you walk back and forth. And when the violence started, the looting and the violence of the 60s, when the PPP was in government, we learned as children that we were given rags, what do you call rags, the little towels, and people started walking with that everywhere they went, because I learned to smell tear gas at the age of about 11. And so you knew when there was tear gas around, you had to find someone's yard for their tap to put water and put the rags on your face to stop the burning from the tear gas. And so they're traumatic memories, but they're also memories for me as a child was that I never wanted to see that happen again. And I used to be teased by my parents, and that I had a very strong sense of justice. And I didn't, although I was shy, I would, if there was someone being bullied or as it happened in the violence, I would express an opinion at 12 years old. And in the school at St. Margaret's, we used to have a diary we had to keep. And I wrote all these things, and they were kept by the school and then subsequently disappeared. But still, leaving Guyana was very, very painful. It was very painful. I really loved it, and I loved my life as a child here, and the family and everything else. So I started St. Rose's, and then I left at Form 3, and I was the top student in Form 1 and 2 at St. Rose's. That was when the nuns ran it, so they were very strict, and there were no boys in the school then at St. Rose's. So they were very strict with us. And we used to go to benediction, I can't remember how often, and for somehow I always used to faint at benediction. And I think the nuns began to suspect that this was deliberate. This was not because of the heat or that you packed 500 girls into a little chapel, that this was some deliberate effort of mine to get away. But, it was, and one of the things I want to say, because younger people listening, we have our patriotic songs, we have our national anthem, and we think that we take it for granted. My generation in 65, 66, had to learn those songs, because we used to sing, God save our gracious Queen. We had to learn now, our national anthem. And so at school, the schools in Guyana had people teaching you what the words were and how to sing them. So we were that first generation of school children that learned our national anthem, because 66 was our independence. And so, we had a music teacher who made us as young ladies sit up properly and put our hands properly. And it was very proper. And it was... I rebelled later on. So in Canada, I was still very shy. I went to a high school in Canada. And that's when I learned about, because in Guyana, although there were racial tensions and stuff like that, I, as a person, was mixed. I didn't feel at school that there was a difference between us based on ethnicity. When I went to Canada, I did. I was called Jewish because I looked Jewish, and I didn't know what that was, because we don't have Judaism, or didn't have Judaism in Guyana. There were racial things. I was not white according to that population. I was somewhere down the line of brown. And so that kind of really fine-tuned my sensitivities or sensibilities to do with these issues of religion and race. And at school, as I got into school more, I became much more talkative, much more expressing my views, particularly on political issues, on historical issues, and even when we did literature. So by the time I left high school in Canada, I was known as a bit of a radical in terms of my opinions. And then I went to university, and by the age of 18, 19, I was in structured politics, not just my opinions and reading. And I think my childhood did that to me. One, in terms of my parents were very strong on issues of equality and justice.
Were they part of any movement?
No. They worked hard. They worked hard, and they worked for their children. But they were not political. My father at one point was a member of the United Force in the early 60s, and then left. But they had very strong values, to respect people, to treat people with dignity, to have no right from wrong. Very strong views of no right from wrong, what you should not do, and not from a religious point of view, from a point of values. My mother was not very religious. My father sometimes. Um, but I was brought up in the Catholic faith as a child. So a number of these things accumulated by the time I was 18, 19. And the world at that time, this is the 70s, early 70s, the world was very much about the younger generation, what was called the hippie culture, the anti-culture. And so, but also the struggles for democracy in South America, because by then Allende had been overthrown. A number of democratic countries, their leaders were overthrown. Dictators came in. You had the anti-apartheid struggle, which I was part of, the struggle for Nicaragua, Vietnam, etc. That was my generation of liberation struggles and struggles for democracy. And so I was part of that in different solidarity groups in Toronto and different combinations of those. And so then I got involved with the Guyanese support group for the PPP. That was called the Association of Concerned Guyanese, and that happened after the 73 elections. And I said to myself, well, I'm involved with a lot of other countries' struggles. Why am I not involved with my own? And so I searched for some solidarity group with Guyana, found that, joined it. I was the only woman in it. I became the only woman who was in the leadership of it, and stayed there until I left to come back home in 77.
But what did you love about politics? What was the moment that cemented for you, yes, this is what I want to be part of?
I tend to, how do I explain it? I tend to get involved with things because I think they're right. They're righteous, just, that I can't stand on the side. But I never really go into it and saying my aim is to be this or my aim is to be that. Someone has told to me that I'm a good supporting actress. And I actually think that's a good description of me, that in terms of my personality and how I've done things when you look back. But it was always about the end game. If we got involved with anti-apartheid movement, it was to end apartheid. So the cause was bigger than me. And the cause is always bigger than the individual. It's always bigger. If you go into politics or any profession, it's about you and you getting position and you getting this, then your heart is not really in it. For me, it was kind of default. I think a number of the things I've got in life is by default. I was there at the right time, at the right moment. I wasn't there that planned to be there, or I had an objective. I'm going to do this because I'm going to get this. And I think that's my upbringing with my parents, which were kind of circumspect. They never wanted to be out front in anything. They wanted to always be behind. And so that my shyness comes out sometimes, which some people laugh at, when I have to take photographs, like a few minutes ago, or to be in front of this mic. Or when I do, even as a politician that has spoken on many platforms for decades, I still, before a microphone, there are a couple of seconds I go blank. And, my friends who are in psychology and stuff, they says it's an anxiety. I always pray that it won't last forever and I'll stand in front of a mic and be totally blank for a long and just can't speak. But it's usually a few seconds.
But you could never tell from listening to you. I even listen to the passion that exudes from you when you're on the election campaign, and you could never tell that.
No, it's a couple of seconds, and everybody laughs at me when I tell them that. They know you can't tell, but there's these couple, I go up to the mic, and there's a second, I'm just blank for a couple of seconds, and then it comes back. But I'm always terrified. One day it'll just be blank. It will not come back. But that's kind of, I met really wonderful young people. I wasn't I was in movements that were peaceful protests, but it was also part of what was called the hippie culture, blue jeans, long hair, not being fancily dressed, but and it was cool. It was kind of cool. People didn't worry about brand names. We didn't know about brand names in those days. And so even blue jeans really became a norm. It was really before what farmers wore and factory workers wore. And here were these young people, particularly young generation, making blue jeans respectable and acceptable. Because it was always looked down if you're wearing blue jeans in the 40s and 50s. You're a farmer, you're a factory worker, And so that generation made blue jeans what it is today. Big brand, big dollars, and stuff like that. So there are a lot of things that are not straight politics, but it was a generation generally that was less about material things and more about change, being change agents and seeing how. So when if you look back at the old footage of the United States, the protest in the universities in those days to end the Vietnam War, phenomenal. And a lot of American students at that time came across, who were escaping the draft, came across to Canada to go to university in Canada. So there was this, and of course there were students from different parts of the world at the university. So we were all involved in each other's struggles of some kind, trying to make a difference, trying to make a change. And, mine was, then I became more focused on Guyana, but not exclusively. And then Chetty came up on the tour, and I helped organize it. It was the biggest turnout in support of Guyana, and with the Association of Concerned Guyanese. And when I was taking him back to the airport, he said, "Well, what are you doing? What do you plan to do?" And I said, "Well, I've finished my master's, I've started my PhD, but I don't want to do it. I want to go home, And
Was it that encounter that prompted your decision to return to Guyana and join the PPP, or was there another?
No, I've been in the association by that time about 3 years, and I wanted to go home. I felt that it was time to go home.
So while you were part of different movements, it was just
I was
something
part of
within you
Guyana
that
and
said-
other movements, and because I wanted to go home, and the thing is how to go home, what to do when I go home. And so, I applied to the University of Guyana to teach. I was rejected because I was called by the PNC and said if I would support their government, they'd give me a job. And I said, I wasn't very polite how I answered. And so, of course, I didn't get the job. And so when Chetty came shortly after up to Toronto, and we had this big support rally for him and so on, when I was taken back to the airport, he asked me what I want to do. And I said, I want to go home. But I don't know how to go home because, I have to work, I have to live. And he said, oh, okay. And he listened to me, and he asked me what I had and all those things. And on my birthday, the best birthday gift I've ever had in my life was on my birthday, a letter arrived from Chetty, and personally written by him, inviting me to come home to be his personal secretary, his personal assistant.
How old were you then?
I was 23. Oh, wow. And so I'd finished just 23, 24. And so then Mrs. Jagan contacted me about arranging how to come home. So I came home on January the 1st, 1977. I entered the new year.
How did your parents feel about that opportunity?
My father was violently against it. He was very strict, conservative Portuguese Guyanese that felt that having... And he didn't put me through university. I put myself through university. I worked and did that because I had walked out of the house when I was 19. We had differences. So I believed that I could do this on my own, even if sometimes I didn't have a cent. And I would not ask for any money from my father. But anyway, those are just funny things. But he was opposed to it. My mother, she was what we called Mrs. Band-Aid. And so she was a peacemaker. And she convinced my father that she's young. Let her go and spread her wings. She'll be back in 3 years' time.
Oh, wow.
So my father, for decades after, reminded her that it's her fault. She let me come back to Guyana and never came back. I went back to visit, of course, to see them, but not to live. And so my father said, it's your fault. You believe this thing about she's going to spread her wings and come back, and there she hasn't come back. But, they were good parents, though. They were... I never got hit. I never was abused. I was never told, that you're no good, you're not smart enough. Just my mother was a little shy and conservative about, if you put yourself out too much there, things could happen.
Was your father afraid because of the environment at the time?
That was part of it. He also had this old-fashioned view that he didn't put me through university, but having gone to university, I should now come back and take care of my parents, help my parents in that way. So it was part of that. And also, they knew a bit of what was going on in Guyana, and they were fearful for me that, things could happen. And I didn't tell them I was going back to work in the People's Progressive Party. I had to have to say that. I told them after I arrived and started working, And my mother, being who she is, I arranged for, when they had a reception in Toronto, the ACG, I said, could you please invite my parents? So they did. And my mother, of course, very intuitive woman, fell in love with Chetty Jagan. And she said, I can understand why you like working with him. She didn't understand his politics, but she felt that he was a good person to work with. And so that was her concern. I've had a good family, even when there have been differences. Their objectives were always the best for their children. And as I said, they were never ostentatious. It was, strong working class values and principles and, how they lived. And that has spread to us, the children. They had 3 children, and my children as well, and my grandchildren. So the certain principles are, cannot be, can't, I think, be erased. And I think that's important, how you bring up people with principles and values. I mean, 2 things my mother taught me. I mentioned at the We Lift exhibition yesterday was 2 words you could not say. They were not allowed in the house. Never. So never say never. And never say can't, cannot. Those are 2 things you weren't allowed to say. So if you decide, I can't do that, or I don't feel I can do this, I don't think I'm good enough to do that, you'll be immediately reprimanded that you could if you put your mind to it. So that, again, those principles which I've retained all these years, that even when I thought I couldn't do something, I do. And even in politics, there have been times that faced with very, very difficult decisions or difficult things to do, and and I think, how could I do this? And somehow, again, that resilience that comes forward and says, okay, I can do it. And sometimes I've been in situations which have been quite risky, and I wade through it. I never turned my back on it. And afterwards, I then, in my quiet corner, when I get back to my cigarette and my coffee, which I use, and it's quiet around me, then I said, holy, what did I do? Oh, jeez, thank you, I'm alive, good. And that's what, at my age now, I'm very grateful to have lived so long. When I look at and see how much more I have, but I'm very grateful because the things I experienced through my life, some of them I would not have come through, may not have come through. And so every day of life, and I've been old enough now to see so many people never reach my age. And so I'm grateful for every day and grateful for everything I experienced, even the good, the bad, and the ugly, And so it's been a rich life, an exciting one. And I've written an article when I think they had that exhibition, the first women's exhibition up at National Stadium. I wrote in for Priya an article about women in politics. And it's very simple, basically saying that what a ride, in terms of if you don't want your heart to be broken, your soul sometimes to question, you don't want to sometimes weep as if your heart's going to break, or curse and bang the wall because you're so angry at what's going on. If you're not, you will face those things. So don't think it's an easy ride. It isn't. And it's one that will make you know your personality, even if you don't want to. Really know yourself, if you're honest, to know what you are, who you are, your weaknesses and your strengths, then go for it. But don't think it's a walk in the park. I mean, some people, in the more modern days when we were in opposition for all these years, it never crossed my mind that I'd be a minister one day. It was never in my mind, even in the years. And so the younger population, younger generation has to look at, we're in good times now, we're in safe times now in terms of the country. We're transforming at a pace that's unbelievable. And it's so visible, it's so palatable. You can see buildings, roads, people's attitudes, people's behavior. And there's a gap, of course, between infrastructure development, legislative change, and people's behavior. There are gaps between that. So you build new roads and people now say, we can drive fast, because before there were potholes. And so the issue of now behavioral change in terms of recognizing you have to conform to the laws of traffic and stuff like that. But the transformation is unbelievable, and therefore in politics it will demand politicians who recognize that it's something we learned, and something we learned again in 2020 elections, is that you can make all the most amazing things, but democracy has to be preserved at all costs. At all costs. And
Yes.
so younger
Yes.
politicians say, oh, look, the ministers look nice, they have cars, they have this. I'd like to be a minister too. Well, it's okay to have ambition, but you recognize that that's not all it is. And two, it's a tremendous amount of responsibility and to develop the trust of the population, and the responsibility of, not just seeing yourself, but why you're there is to serve the people, that you must serve the people. If you have ambitions of your own self and where you're going to go and what you're going to buy and what you're going to do, you're in the wrong job. That's my old-fashioned maybe view, but that's what I believe. And that you are there as a politician to serve in the best way. You are the vehicle to serve the people. That's all you are. And that's my thinking.
I want to take you back to when you accepted the application, the job to be the personal secretary for the late Chadi Jagan. And I wanted to get your perspective or to go back to that time when you were first asked to speak on a public platform.
Yeah.
What was that experience like? Because based on my research, I understand that he also had some encouraging words for you.
Yeah, he did. He made me. The first time I ever spoke on a public platform was the same trip he made to Toronto. And so we'd organized, I'd done the programs, we'd mobilized. We had about 2,000 people at one of the halls in Toronto. And, I gave him the program. And he said, where are you? And I said, no, I'm not on it. So and so and so and so and so. He said, why are you not on it? And I said, I don't speak. I don't know how to speak. I've never spoken on a platform, and that's not my role. And so he called everybody together and said, put Gail on the platform. I was terrified, absolutely petrified. In front of a hall of 2,000 people, my first time to speak. Oh. And I was given 3 minutes. So everyone was given 3 minutes so Chedi would have the main thing. So that was when he first night, and I said, please don't do this to me. I've never spoken. I don't know how to. He said, no, go. So there's a photograph of me speaking in Toronto. And then when I came back, I had never been a personal secretary. I had worked in a factory. I'd worked in accounts payable to put myself to university. I tried in a restaurant as a waitress. I failed badly in that, terribly. Terrible waitress. It was right to leave the job before I got fired. But factory I worked in. But I thought, God bless his soul. To take this young woman from Toronto and take her as your personal secretary. I'd never been a secretary to anybody, so I didn't even know what I was supposed to do. And he was extraordinarily patient with me, and Janet Jagan really guided me. But he would, and so in the early part, he would go out, drive in, go to some area with sugar workers or whatever, and he said to me the first time, would you like to come for a drive? You've been to this area. And I said, no, I've been really a Georgetown girl. And he said, no, come. So I went, and it was in a field with farmers, and there was a little table and chairs, and they came to see him. And so, I'm sitting there with my notepad to make notes. Mm-hmm. And he says, no. And so he said, do you know this young lady here? And they all said, of course they don't know me. And, of course, because of the color of my skin, I was kind of unusual. And so he said, no, this is so-and-so. And he said, she's going to speak. And I nearly said, I'm going to kill you, really. Even though you have your bodyguards, I'm going to kill you. So that was, again, my first speech in a field. Mm-hmm. With men with their boots on and farmers, and speak to them. Mm-hmm. And they say, how do I speak to farmers? I'm really not knowledgeable. So I try to talk on issues of democracy and union rights and the human rights issues. And they were very gracious. So I started to get my feet wet in that area. But still, when I have to prepare, I always have this thing, how do I speak? And then somehow, somewhere along the line, I begin to maybe feel more relaxed, and then sometimes I do the opposite. I talk too much. So, it's a balance. But I think that for women in politics, all of us, women in careers, or women working basically, there are certain things in common. Many times we're mothers. Many times we are taking care of the elderly or persons who are children. We have husbands to take care of or partners to take care of. We have our jobs. And so any woman getting into careers has to know that how do you balance. Men don't have to do the same thing, at least not yet. And that is, to say, okay, well, I'm working and I'm working late at night and, well, she's there. And I always used to say, I'm looking for a wife to take care of me because trying to do all these multitasking. But all women do that. And especially now with a lot of the care of the elderly, disabled, children with special needs, even if they're not biologically connected to you, and especially women who are single parents, the task is even greater for them because they don't have, in the old days, families helped a lot more, and the extended family helped. Due to immigration and a change in our culture, it's not quite there anymore, and in the really difficult days in Guyana, it was people in the countryside that helped us in town with sending down rice or callaloo and all those things because things were rough here. And so all women face that, long hours, etc. So we're all, as women, going through guilt, that you're not paying enough attention to your work, you're not paying enough attention to your children, your husband may be neglected or not, or sometimes he deserves to be neglected, but, sometimes. So you're balancing the worlds, and so you go through a lot of anguish. Am I doing it right? How do I manage this? And so that is always at the back of my head. It's always been at the back of my head. And I think my children have been wonderfully forgiving. They both kind of said, you're a good mama. You gave us quality time. And I'm thinking, when did I do that? How did I do that? But they've been very kind to me, and I'm grateful for that because they could have been children that said, oh, she was a politician and she neglected us. And so they may think that, but they don't tell me that. They may, so it's difficult for women and for politics because you can be under fire, particularly now. So in my day, you had newspapers. Many people didn't have phones. And so if someone like New Nation wrote something about me, they called me Janet Jagan's sidekick. They had a cartoon with me shaped like a Coca-Cola, which I thought maybe that was a compliment. I wasn't sure. Coca-Cola bottle. So when you saw those things, you would say them a week later, or in the countryside, they would see it maybe 6 weeks later. There's letters and newspapers. And so, but today it's much more personal and immediate. So as women today, as politicians generally, or anybody, that violation of your space is much more immediate, and the criticism of you much more immediate.
How would you advise that women deal with such assaults on their character?
I think there's some ways that I would probably not be popular in terms of just ignoring it. In other cases, taking it on in a less personal way. For me, it's always go for the high ground, not for the interpersonal. So I don't think I need to defend me personally, but I'll defend the principle of what you shouldn't do. So, for example, some recent comments made by a politician to do with mosque and LGBTQI, that's a matter of principle, and the fact that 2 politicians were named in that is unacceptable. So how do we deal with that? Do we go out then? Always the difficulty in social media is how much do you say? Do you look as if you're trying to overcompensate? Do you look as if you're trying to talk too much or defend yourself too much? Because then people say if you're saying too much, maybe there is something to defend. It's something you are doing. So you have that balance is always there. And for women too, the invasion of your personal space. Throughout politics, so generally for many years, when a woman is looked at in politics, it's a different measure by men in politics. So, for example, a man goes up as a candidate for election in some level, region, NDC, whatever, and the assessment by the political parties has generally been, oh, is he a good man and whatever, what does he do? For a woman, they'll then say, and it has been, it's changing now, but it was before, who's her father? Is her father a good man or a bad man? Who's her husband? Is he a good man? So she'll be judged by the men in her life and not by her. As I said, that's changing now, and that's good. But still, for years it was, if her father was a drunkard, then she's not a very good candidate, or whether he was a wife beater. So she was judged by her father and the men in her family, her brothers, uncle, grandfather, rather than her and what she brings to the table. As I said, that's changing, and it's important that we're selected based on who we are and what we offer and what we can offer, and the strength of which we come with. And so I think those are changing, those issues are changing. And we haven't had in Guyana what I've seen in some of our sister countries. Women have been chosen as tokens. My own view generally in Guyana, with both my party and even the opposition, that is PNC, which is the main opposition, is that women were really selected out of what they were, what they did, generally. That's not the case I see so much in another party, but that's a different issue. So I think that, and all the political parties in Guyana historically, the trade unions, etc., have been based on women. The one shift that hasn't taken place in women is the trade unions. So trade unions, like 70% women across Guyana, including the public service. It's been very difficult for women to get into the leadership of the TUC or the FITOG, etc. Private sector, we're seeing a change there, which is very encouraging, with the women's chamber, the women in oil, and the two women who are now heading the two chambers.
Yes.
They've broken the glass ceiling, because up until that there was no woman heading anything. Right. And so I'm really excited about the young women who are stepping forward. They're young, they're confident, and so on. And what will require of them is to have stickability. It's not easy to stick with something for, a long time. You get bored, or you get tired, or people get know too much of your business, and you figure it's time to move on.
That's interesting. Stickability. What has been the secret to your stickability in what you've been doing as a veteran? You're synonymous with being a veteran for protecting democracy.
It's funny, I didn't see myself as just part of the group. This is what I do. And so I never saw myself as anything special. Now that you got older, it's hard to say old, but older. I still haven't come to terms with that, but older, and people keep saying these nice things about me. And I kind of say, how come that's happening? I mean, I've been here all the time. And so it's I have a mental adjustment to all these nice things that people say. I've come through politics where on the outside you're not told nice things, and so that for me to adjust to that and feel uncomfortable with it, because I feel I'm not used to being flattered, and so I kind of feel uncomfortable with that. But my role now, as at the time I'm at, really is of course I'm a party member. I've always been, from the age of 23, 24 to now, is that to make sure my party is strong, that the young members coming in are well groomed, and that they understand their commitment to the party. And of course my commitment to my party and the government, the People's Progressive Party Civic. So I see myself role more now as someone. My duty now, it's not my role, my duty now is to help to groom the present population, the present members that are there, to make sure I contribute to making them strong leaders for the future. Because that's what keeps the party together. We're 75 years old as a party, 76, sorry. And how did that come about? Through leaders and people who are grassroots people, farmers and workers, sugar workers, and you had Chedi and Janet, you had Ripu Diman Prasad, you had many others, Feroz Mohammed and others, Roger Luncheon. These are leaders that gave their all and gave everything. And so those kind of role models to see how you play and how you're able to withstand some of the things, because as I said, the social media world is so much more personal. People can say such terrible things about you. And how do you psychologically, emotionally deal with that? I had it in a different way, with the issue of some of the protests with the violence. And my first political meeting took place in Guyana. I wasn't speaking. It was in Merriman's Mall, which now has the shops, but it was just a field then. And went there, and we were ordered. The House of Israel turned up, and so with sticks and so on, and we were told by the party leaders, evacuate, go. So I was sent with 2 young men down Church Street to escape from there, and then the House of Israel men found us, and they beat us, and one of the young men lost one of his eyes, and so on. So that exposure was either to say, should I go back to Toronto or should I stay here? And that thought of going back to Toronto was never there in my head. This is how bad it is. Then I'm meant to be here. I have to be here. And so that kind of, my training was different because you were in the moment and in violence moments, moments where things were really hard, when they were banned food and people, and then the levels of malnutrition, it's just bad. And I want the younger generation to have an idea, how do we get to where we are? Because if we don't know where we've come from, you could repeat all this, what we went through. And my thing is always that in honoring those who served before me, before I returned and before I joined, was to honor those people who stuck it out in very difficult days, in the colonial days as well as post-independence, to honor those who helped to bring us to 92 October 5th, and then those who have helped and been there from October 5th, 1992 to now, and to ingrain in people that view of stickability, resilience, strength, a lot of strength, because they had families. The men I work with, I mostly work with men when I was young because there weren't many women around. So in strikes, when there was sugar strike for recognition of the union, we had to go into the back dam at night to carry food to the sugar workers. And the military at that time would seize all our rice and stuff. So you had to do things secretively or quietly. And I was the only woman in the group of people that would do that. And so, and what was interesting, and I look back at it, is that these guys didn't treat me like, oh, she's a woman, she can't do it. But I was the only woman they would select to do with them. So it's kind of, what was it? But I want the younger generation to have an appreciation of what it took to bring us where we are. Where we are today, the leadership of President Irfan Ali, the leadership of the party, the leadership and the way in which we've grown. The number of people who've come on board, the number of young people. I'm so proud of my cabinet that I work with and the MPs that I'm working with. And I want those people to be there with others to continue to build Guyana. For me, my 3 loves, what people said were my 3 loves in life. One was my party, one was my children, and one was my country. And not necessarily in that order, of course, because my children might be insulted that I put the party first. But I think they kind of know sometimes. So the next generation, the world we're going into is not an easy one. We are in a good place now. We are in what I keep saying is our golden era. This is the golden era of Guyana.
Yes.
This is where we're at. And hopefully we do the right things and we keep it going and keep building, because Guyana today is unbelievably beautiful. It's always been beautiful, but so painful, so traumatized in so many ways. Now people have hope. People are saying, I'm getting my house, I'm getting a car, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Hope and optimism. Whereas before, up to maybe 15 years ago, 10 years ago, people were saying, I'm waiting for my visa to come through.
That's true. But Minister Teixeira, before, I do want to get back to that comment about the golden era. But there's a comment that you made earlier about being referred to as a supporting actress.
Yes.
And throughout the length and breadth of your career, we've seen you take on leading roles in building Guyana, in nation building.
Yeah.
And you've held several ministerial portfolios, health, home affairs, culture and sports, and of course, your current role, parliamentary affairs and governance. Of all of those roles, which do you think tested you the most? And where do you see your most visionary work?
Home affairs tested me the most because it was during the crime wave.
Okay.
So that was where sleep was very little and real fear about could I manage the situation, I think the most traumatic one in that period was when my colleague Sash Saw was assassinated in that period. That's an issue I go through. Where I felt I did my best work in some ways, and I had the most fun doing it, was culture, youth, and sport. With the area of culture, youth, and sport, all three. Health was my first portfolio, and the one when we didn't have money. But I love health, and I do like primary health care. That's my love, is primary health care, to go out and make sure people have access to health in the villages and so on. So I'm very much a primary health care person. I'm very happy that we're going into very modern, high-tech health care. But I always believe that the foundation is primary healh care, people's access.
It's interesting.
And so that if you don't have good primary health care, you're going to have a lot of problems, even bigger problems further up in the what you call the trajectory or pathway of health care.
It's interesting that you said health is your first love, because one of the first landmark bills that you championed was the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Bill. That was 1995.
Yeah.
What were the stories that fueled how you fought for that bit of legislation? And was it controversial during that time?
Oh, it was. But I'll say that if we hadn't done it then, we wouldn't be able to do it today. And I'll explain why. I go back to when you're in politics or in a party, you are part of a collective and part of the discipline of that collective. So I was Minister of Health, and infant mortality and maternal mortality when I came in, it was extraordinarily high. Abortion was illegal. I set up a technical committee to say what was the cause of maternal deaths. And they came and said, but number 3 cause, which was the one I could change, because the others, having midwives and doctors at the delivery areas and a number of conditions, it would take me years to do that, and we didn't have money. The number 3 one was botched up abortions. So women ended up in public hospitals, hemorrhaging, dying. And so that was the one we could change. And how could we change that? By law. And so I then set up another committee made up of members of the judiciary, doctors, Christians, Hindus, Muslims, etc. And eventually they came forward and said this was something that we should try. Now, before me was Dr. Blackman, who was a Minister of Health prior to Hamilton Green. And he had brought a bill to his cabinet and to his ministry for the medical termination. And it was rejected. It was not allowed to go forward. And so I looked at that bill. There were things I didn't agree with it, but we started amending that. And I then went to my party and said, look, this is what I'd like to do. And Chedi, with all, again, bless his soul, was that do it in a way that brings people in rather than alienating people. And so eventually we got it to a point. We spoke to the opposition MPs at the time, and that was Faith Harding, and she was for it. And she talked to her party, and they said, okay, go, but carefully, and make sure everybody gets blamed together, not just one party or one person. So we then set up a group. Now, WPA had one person in Parliament at that time, and we invited them to send a female member of their party. So we decided for the first time in the history of Parliament, women having across party lines, meeting and talking about the medical termination of pregnancy bill, abortion, and how we deal with it. And so we reached an agreement that the next stage from my party and president was go for a Parliamentary Select Committee, which is what we did. And that's when we had hearings with all sorts of stakeholders, and the bill was amended as a result of that, of the contributions. So the medical doctors, the council, and the association said the original bill had like 20 weeks. It was reduced to 16. The religious community said, we should have a 24-hour wait time so that people consult their pastors or their imams, we put that in the bill. And so it was built over stages, and of course, it was terribly controversial in certain ranks. I got things sent to me with blood on it, dolls with blood, There was a protest in Georgetown which ironically chased people away, but it was meant to pull people in that direction, to support it, with women walking through the town with dolls, with red paint. And this was what abortion was all about. One group came in from the United States and went to Lodge housing scheme with all these horrific paintings, photographs of what abortions were, and went to the women and said, don't have abortions and stuff like this, it's terrible. And a number of the women said, well, you're going to mind my babies? Who's going to mind them? So because the same group is anti-birth control. So they're not just anti-abortion, anti-birth control. And so the women in Lodge said, a number of women said, so if I keep making babies, who going to mind them? And they kind of made them go away. So it was controversial. And the day we brought it from the select committee into the House, basically Faith Harding and myself, Indra Chandapal, we were the key persons. Indra chaired the select committee on the medical termination. And we had agreed at the party level and with the Women's Caucus in the opposition government was the bill after that would be domestic violence, which was the bill after that on domestic violence. It was a very interesting period, and the day when we read it in the House and it passed, and I was terrified because both parties had also decided that we would agree on a vote of conscience. So the first vote of conscience in the history of our Parliament, and the only one as far as I know, is that one. I was terrified, and we could lose. We won. Wow. But in the Parliament, and the whole Parliament was crowded with the women advocates as also persons who are opposed to it. And someone just sent me this week an actual video of me presenting the bill in Parliament, which I don't know where that came from. Mm-hmm. That's 1995, and where did that come from? I didn't even know. So those two bills, and that bill, the MTP, is the first bill in the history of our Parliament that it was a bill exclusively for women. It's the only one. Mm-hmm. Because you have others that came after domestic violence. Now you have sexual offences, you have the Family Violence Act and so on, which have fine-tuned and improved what happened in those days. But they're all now, sexual offences now doesn't only deal with women. Domestic violence doesn't or no longer deal with women. But it was and still remains the only piece of legislation exclusive for women because nobody else can have an abortion except a woman. And so it made history. And so it was, but it has also helped to reduce maternal mortality. And and I think we have succeeded in not making it a bill that, a tool that people use, because we didn't want, and we were very clear that it should not be a form of birth control. Yes. Because that's what it was being used as. And we didn't want to encourage that. We wanted to say there are other methods you could use, and so avoid abortion except when it's absolutely necessary.
With all that you've seen transpired over the years and your contributions as well as that of your party to ensure that the rights of women are protected, do you see women being more towards the center of social, economic, and political power?
And women, I think, have always been the center of political parties, number one. And also, if we don't include women in the economy, in the society, the society can't grow, can't develop. You're always going to be held back. So all these efforts of entrepreneurship, of training, of access to loans, of access to... These are all enabling environments for women to be able to take their rightful place and to be able to contribute. As long as women are, and this is a proven fact, as long as women are not involved in the economy actively or on the sideline, there'll be no development. You can't get, society can't move forward as fast. It'll move forward, but not as fast as if the women of the society are engaged actively as participants at the political level, the legal level, the judicial level, the business level, private sector, at all levels. And I think when you look at Guyana, we've made some amazing achievements. 70% of our judiciary is female, which is the highest level in the world, actually, as far as I know. these number of women going into business entrepreneurship, not just looking for jobs, but actually becoming masters of their own destiny in a sense, that they're their own boss. And so a lot of the younger generation want the idea of, I'm my own boss. You know, I don't have to work for somebody else. So a lot of the younger generation, they can do it based, technology helps them to do a lot of things that couldn't be done before. Mm-hmm. But the fact that the more women are involved and engaged, as I said, in a society, the faster it goes, much faster. And I think that, of course, they're the center. I believe we're the center of everything as women. But, but the and it's all very new, of women taking on this mantle in a very public way. It isn't that women weren't entrepreneurs before. They were small, but they're small and didn't have a voice. They were kind of tolerated in some levels. What has changed is radically women having a voice, women participating, women investing and trying to balance, as I said, the different worlds that we live through. And young. It's exciting to see all these young women, I mean, doing things that older women had wanted to do but couldn't do. And I hope that they get all the support they deserve. And I've spoken to some of them is that you got to stick to this. You can't expect, to have results in a few years. You got to stick to this. Don't just, that kind of lecturing or preaching. But and of course the women at politics. One of the things, though, that is my chagrin in certain ways is that we as women sometimes think that we're the angels. We have all the good qualities. Yes, but we're humans. We have personalities. We're not all nice. I don't like this romanticism of women. I think we have to be more realistic. But of course, we're absolutely and critically important to our societies, our families, and everybody else. But this romanticizing that we're all good, I don't think that's always true. We're humans and we have different personalities.
I agree with you.
And then it comes to politics. The view that women, I believe that war, conflict, the victims are majority female and children, right? And I believe that we as women should stand up for peace, and because without peace, societies can't move forward, and of course democracy can come under threat. But there are women in politics who are right-wing, left-wing, center-wing, waffling between. And so we're not amorphous in our political views. Just because the general view is that we are for peace, we're for this, we're for that. It's not generally true, though. The people who, I think, really understand that peace and, no conflict is critical to their survival are the people who have been victims of it, the victims of war, the victims of conflict, of violence. I think they know it much better than sometimes some of the politicians. And the world the young people are growing up in now, I think it's going to be enormously challenging in many ways.
But you said, you don't like this romanticizing of women. I love that you made that point because I think it speaks to that aspect of you that is introspective and appreciates the value of self-criticism.
Yeah.
On that note, there are women who hold power, hold certain positions, but they do engage in infighting. There is that sort of moments where you see the women who are supposed to be uplifting each other also attacking each other.
Yeah.
What's your message to women who may be involved in that?
As I said, if we don't look at things realistically, people choose their beliefs and they choose their practices, their values. And a man and a woman are both susceptible to be criticized when they don't fulfill what they promised or what they appear to be. So sometimes we treat issues in a almost amorphous way. All women are alike, all men are alike. So all men are bad, women are good. First of all, I don't agree with that. A lot of my political grooming has been with men who, when I look back in the era I was in, they should not have given me any break at all. and they did, and they pushed me. So I have that personal issue, which may not be true across the board. But I think that when there's a difference between disrespecting someone, male or female, and getting into their personal lives and their families and their husbands and children and stuff like that, there's a difference with that than being what you stand for, what you believe in. That it's different. So even if a member of the opposition gets up and says something bad about a woman in Parliament, I would jump up or I'd protest. But nevertheless, the difference is when we get on the floor and we argue about what our views are. You know, that's I call Speaker Scotland used to hate when I said that the Parliament, National Assembly, was the amphitheatre of the politicians. He thought that I meant it was a blood sport, and he and I argued about it many times. But I didn't mean it as a blood sport. I meant it was the amphitheatre where it's our space and where we argue or agree. And so how do we, as politicians, deal with what we believe in and what we fight for, what we stand up for, and what... I don't want every issue to become genderized, you know, because I believe that, in a sense, we must be treated equally, and therefore I, as a woman politician, have a right to speak just as much as a male. And I must be given that space, and I must have my view, as all MPs should, and all women and male MPs should. So whilst I'm in absolute support of things like when we change the electoral laws, so that a party cannot contest unless they had 1/3 females on the ballot. Absolutely in support of that. Because at that time, only about 10 or 12% of the MPs were women in the House. As soon as that law was passed and we went into the first election, we went up to 20%. Now, our law doesn't require the party then to select the 1/3. But what has been an interesting experience, and it needs to be studied and analyzed, how in Guyana we required a law to make parties eligible only if they had 1/3. And how did that lead to the parties then naming 1/3? Because they weren't required to. They're not required to. So the view that, you know, going into constitutional reform, they may want to make that now, add that on and thing, but we've already been practicing it. We have 30-odd% women in Parliament already. And so we already have the 1/3 in Parliament, generally in the last two parliaments, 3 parliaments. And that, would it make any sense, although the other view that may come up in the Constitution reform, they want it to be 50%. That's okay with me. But I don't like any view, male or female, being selected because we have to do numbers. So I still feel that it's on the quality of the person. Are they genuine? Are they real? Are they loyal? Are they disciplined? Those are my kind of benchmarks. So I tend to sometimes, but I try to make sure always that there's female representation and that is, but not to, because I wouldn't like to see also a very good male candidate being denied an opportunity because we have to slot a woman in. So I still feel that we need some flexibility or ability to choose the best that we have. And that's the concept, not to have the numbers. But I may be getting into very controversial waters right now. As you can hear the women, some of the women taking me on. But because I think that Guyana is in such a special place. We need the best of what we have and the best who are dedicated to Guyana, who want to see Guyana not only keep growing, but also to sustain it. You know, and to sustain us, which are going to be, what is going to be some very delicate waters. What's going on globally is really going to have an impact on Guyana.
Speaking of candidates, Minister Teixeira, do you think Guyana is ready for a female president?
We've had one before. And why not?
In this period.
I think, look, you've got President Irfan Ali. I look around, and it's my... You know, when you get to my age, you can kind of look back on things and can be a little more, less personal or less self-interest. I look at President Irfan Ali. I'm awed by what he does, the energy, the dedication, the visibility, the accessibility, the visionary, and all that kind of thing. And so, whether it's a male or female next time round, they've got enormous shoes to fill. Enormous shoes. So it's not just choosing, it's going to be an issue of, unless the constitutions change, that his boots are enormous to fill, whether for a man or a woman. Because when I look around, I'm not quite sure. But Guyana, yes, we've had a woman, and I think that we are ready. And it will be controversial in some areas, but I think that it's not that we're not ready. I think it's more the issue of what is the need for Guyana, what the parties think Guyana needs in terms of selection of a candidate, But Irfan was the absolute correct candidate to have the party to have chosen, and he's outshone all of what benchmarks we had laid down as a party leadership. And for me, my greater concern is not as who is a woman or a man, but next round, who can fill his shoes? Awesome and terrifying at the same time, But it's so those are some of the challenges we'll face, and globally we're going to face some other challenges. So, but right now we have a government that has its 5 years, so it go till 2031. We have challenges of our border. We have the challenges globally of war, and the impact of those on cost of living. Our price of our oil, gas, cost of living for Guyanese people and all over the world. It's not just going to be here, it's everywhere it's going to happen. And what's going on at the UN in terms of what's happening at what they call the international order. My generation looks at it in horror, those of us who are very involved, because that whole issue of peace and democracy and rule of law and international rule of law. And our government has also historically stood for multilateralism. These are fundamental principles that have to be protected. Otherwise, things will get very, very difficult for everybody. But also, too, to protect global democracy, global democratic governance. And so this principle is still that we have to become familiar with it, because much of what we can do or what could impact on us negatively, we know what's good is happening. We also have to know what could happen that's negative. And therefore, how do we also teach our people, teach them to understand that if there's a cost of living, it's like with COVID, what happened in COVID, cost of living went up, cost of shipping went up, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, the fundamental issues of democracy, one of the fundamental issues is people's access to, what they say is informed population. And that's where your role becomes very critical, the role of the media and journalists, to make sure that we're giving balanced information to people so they make their choices. They have a right to choose. But the issue is that an informed population of what is going on, globally or otherwise, is a critical component for maintaining democracy, because people can be misled, etc. And especially with social media, you have trolls now that people can't even recognize. Trolls on the media, they don't AI. So right now there are AI creations on the media and AI and social media that's showing what you think are photographs of what's going on in Iran and the Gulf states.
Yeah, it's becoming harder
and
to
it's scary
differentiate
because
fact
I
from
think I'm
fiction.
looking at a bombed out building in
Yeah.
Tel Aviv, and it's some other AI creation. I'm not sure how it works, but I want to see the real thing. I want to know. And so it becomes very scary when people are seeing AI creations and don't know and don't know it's not the truth.
Yes.
And so that's a big challenge for us going forward in terms of AI has tremendous opportunities for developing countries and for allowing countries to go at a tremendous speed forward, and it can be used as a tool for access to information, access to services, for science and innovation, a lot of possibilities. But also we still have to deal with issues of protection of human rights, protection of people getting balanced information and true information, because you show photos of very what you call horrific scenes, and they're not the truth. They're from something 10 years ago or something. Then you can then make people get angry, become violent, because they're seeing terrible things, particularly in their own country. So those are challenges the younger generation have that we had not at that level, you know. So it would take us years ago several weeks to find out what was going on in another country, you know. But that has radically changed now. And so that whole issue of an informed population, and so the role of the media here in terms of their professional ethics, and how do we teach our people about how to distinguish between an AI-generated information and a real one? I don't know how you do that. You're the experts.
Yes,
I don't know how
there
you
is.
do that. But we need to do that soon and quickly, because we are all getting misinformation, you know. All.
Yes, we're indeed in that era. Minister Teixeira, I want to sneak in 2 quick questions before we close. I have been reading this very interesting book. The point is to change the world. It's selected writings of Andaye. And selected writings of Andaye, one of the founding members of the WPA. And there's a passage in it.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, that's okay. There's a passage in it which says, if you want to know the struggles of Guyana, speak to the women.
Yeah.
But we don't speak to them enough, or as often as we should. In that passage, it also notes that one of the women we should also speak to is Andaye, who's passed. But I want to get from you, who do you think are some of the women who know Guyana struggles that we should never forget?
Well, first of all, I knew Andaye because we were part of that generation. And those were the days when the WP and PPP worked together closely. So I know Andaye. I knew Andaye. But I think that we have to, and many countries have to, and we say we're going to do it many times. We try in many ways. We don't succeed. The history starts with women who were part of slave rebellions. And 1763, the Berbice Rebellion, of the women who were involved as indentured laborers in protest for better working rights, for all these things. So these are unnamed heroines, because someone needs to do research. There are women from the Berbice Rebellion. There are. You know, they are named in a few places, but you don't know much about them. You have the indentured laborers again, and you have Kausalya, who is a descendant and in the trade union movement. So you have women in those areas, and Women and Gender Equality had done a collection of women in Guyana in education, in different fields, public service. They have that book on it, and they usually exhibit when they deal with International Women's Day. So they're the ones that have tried to create this collection of women, not women in politics, women in Guyana. And so it's women from different aspects of life. But we have women who took part in so many protests that brought changes. Many of them are unnamed. Many of them, we knew them by call names and not their real names. Came from mainly the countryside. Women in the Arno Rampersad case, there was 3 trials that went on here, and we had protests every day when the trials were on in Georgetown, and the women who came out were from the countryside with the romals, and I don't know if anybody knows what a romal is anymore, the head tie, and many of them were barefoot with bangles or rubber sandals every day religiously, and we didn't have much to give them. Pine tart, you know, egg ball, and some swank. You know, they didn't get paid. So, I mean, those are the women, the faces I remember, that we need to write about. We need to find, you know, as I said, we honor Kausalya, which was today the anniversary of her death or murder. And so you have those women of that generation. You have the women, interesting enough, and some of them have recently died, like Shirley Edwards, who was a group of the young people in the People's Progressive Party in the 60s when there were strikes, and the power company were on strike, so we had no electricity, and people like Shirley Edwards she was every night she had several children. I think it was 5. She was there every night guarding, the same GPL headquarters down there. So the women in many aspects of life. We think of our contributions as, people are out there in the public and stuff. But what you do, what I've done, I can't take the credit of all of it. I can't take the credit because I've had the backing of too many people. I've had people who believed in what I was saying and acted on that. And so I think that it's important to name famous judges, Desiree Bernard and the present, Roxanne George, phenomenal women who have been permanent secretaries, women who have been headmistresses and heads of hospitals and nurses. And it's a huge movement, and therefore sometimes it's the small stories that make a difference in people's life. So yes, I'm a politician, I'm out there, and people like what I say sometimes, but what makes a difference is a woman who's a nurse in a hospital with a woman who's delivering, who is in terrible pain, who knows to be kind and to be professional. That makes the difference. That person could live or die if that nurse or doctor does the wrong thing. What I say and do may not cause someone to die. And so my perspective is to treat with some of the small stories and also to treat with the movements. And so it's historical. Under colonialism, the photographs that show the freedom marches of women and men walking from Quarantine to Georgetown for the end of colonialism. Those women names we don't know. We don't know their names, or and because so many people emigrated, sometimes it's hard to trace back. Because remember, over 100,000 people more emigrated from this country within 20 years, 25 years. So the linkages with family is difficult. So we haven't researched it. We haven't done our work. And I don't think it's exclusively women, but I think that this is a whole project. And really to try with the stories, the narratives, rather than saying looking for the big names. Where are the stories of change? What have we done? The women who are part of what was the village councils in the, who made change in people's lives or got drains dug that were never dug before, and stuff like that. I think we have to set what is it we're looking for. The big names, or we're looking for the women who, in a daily way, made life. The nannies, what were called the nannies in the interior, who were the birth attendants, little ladies who delivered babies. And I remember when I went to Berbice River, when I became Minister of Health, and there hadn't been a medics or a nurse there for 10 years. Nobody had ever visited for 10 years. So we went in the river and doing healthcare as well as dentistry, And I met this nanny, this birth attendant, little old lady, Amerindian, tiny. She was actually smaller than me, shorter than me, which is quite a thing. And I said to her, Auntie, how many children have you delivered? And she said in the last maybe 5 years, 7 years, she delivered 20 babies. It's a river, Berbice River. And so I said to her, that's fantastic. And did you have any deaths, babies dying or the mothers dying? And she said, oh my gosh. She said, I lost one baby. And she said, up today, I remember that. And I said, well, how long ago was that? She said, it was about 10 years ago, and I still remember. And I said, why did the baby die? And she said, the mother came too late from a creek and had to come to where she was. And so the fact that the birth attendant, who was not a trained midwife, but trained to deal with delivering, still carried in her conscience this sorrow for a baby that died out of 20. And so those people that kept in the interior, particularly the nannies, what were called nannies, birth attendants, sometimes the village women who are not nannies at all, they weren't trained, but they traditionally delivered babies. And so, I mean, the stories that we have to tell, we were good at telling stories in the 50s and 60s. A lot of what was told were stories. Our parents told grandmothers, you go to a village, you hear a story. We're less now about those stories.
Yes.
And we're losing those stories because a lot of them kept culture alive, kept tradition alive, kept recognition alive.
Yes.
Recognition of people and individuals. And so, yes, we need to. And we haven't done it much for men either. So there needs to be a whole review. And usually that starts at universities. I'm not seeing that, to tell you the truth. But it's an opportunity for a range of stories that tells what women have done in this country and are still doing. It's just not much more public now than before. But, I was delighted to find out that one of my favorite churches, which was burnt down, was Sacred Heart, was, when I went back in the records, it's a woman who made the biggest contribution to the building of that church. The first church that got burned down, the wooden church, was a woman, Portuguese woman, who was a spinster, as they said in those days. And in the record it says spinster. And she was a small businesswoman. And she gave the largest amount of money and the development of that church. And it was never recorded. It was never, no one said anything in the church, the Catholic Church itself, saying that was the case. So, I mean, the stories are many. And I think even in our own families, they're keeping stories alive. I mean, I grew up with wonderful grandparents that told stories, And so I've tried to capture them. I've tried to put some of them in writing. I've tried to share some of those with my cousins. There's still more to write. But to keep them alive, and because that's part of what society is. It's not just the families within them. So I think Anda is right, but it's a big project, and, people say I should write too, and I keep saying, how, when?
Yes.
How, when? I know I should. I know I'm supposed to. But how, when? You do that. People have ghostwriters now and things like that. And I'm not sure I can manage that. But I think that the younger generation will have to pick up those mantles to do those things, and to do it with the love and respect that it comes from. Because when you start delving in to the women who have been part of that era, previous eras, then you really learn to respect what came before. And I mean, there are many things that wouldn't be written or haven't been written for many reasons. During the different strikes and everything, the number of people who had to hide food from the army, and when the army and police would come in, what would happen with the raids, what happened after elections, when a number of elections, when people were picked up and put in police stations, in detention, some who were missing for days, and then were found. We had to go to the courts for habeas corpus. Those stories integrate with what women went through, what families went through, and what was clear was that if the women in those situations did not support the men in their situations, those men would not have been able for a long time to carry out what they did in terms of strikes. So in a number of strikes, one of them was, I think, 78 days, for example. If the women didn't stand with them and say, we don't have a lot of food's running out, you're not getting paid in those days if you're on strike, the men would have had to go back to work. And so the role of women is multifaceted, multi-layered, and make a difference in everything that happens in society. If they feel strongly about certain things, protest starts at home. So we know women, when we're angry or something, we protest at home. We don't cook supper for you.
Minister Teixeira, to close off, what we do for season 3 is our previous guests, they leave a question for the next without knowing who that person might be. And so our last guest was the Minister of Agriculture, Zulfikar Mustafa, and here's his question for you. If you could change one fundamental part of how our economy works to give people a greater shot at moving up, what would it be?
You should have tipped me off. It's an interesting question. I mean, it's hard to say one thing, because I do believe that that making change in the economy require multiple interventions. But I think what we're doing now, actually, I think are some of the correct moves in terms of access to to the commercial banking on a much easier way, and the Guyana Development Bank in terms of zero interest. These are critical areas to bring people out of poverty, and so, and to make a much more what you call equitable society. We have always been a society for the last 15 years, 20 years, with having the lowest level of disparities between rich and poor in Latin America. That may change, but I believe that one of the key interventions, a lot of areas of social protection and so on are important, but I believe one of the key areas is access to either zero interest rates, particularly for those who are poor and vulnerable, and or low interest loans. And I'll go back and maybe not answer his question so well, is that for me, housing has been one of the biggest drivers in the economy since we started it. And it's now picked up speed, and we have more technology and more things. And that impact of housing is enormous on the economy, enormous. And again, going back to people, their sense of security collateral is that piece of land, that piece of house, that opens up many opportunities that they never would have had before. And so the issue of access to loans, and that has been proven when you read some of the World Bank, IDB, and other interventions of, yes, governments do provide social protection in a variety of ways, some don't, but that so the combination with a social protection plus access to the areas or programs like housing to radically change their lives. And when they do that, it changes the society as well. It brings in a culture of thrift. There's a variety of things, as well as security, but also in terms of the construction industry, the raw materials industry, transportation, a whole range of issues, technology, lights, water, etc. It radically changes how the economy and the society functions. And we saw it, and we've seen it, and it's now galloping much more in that way. So for me, it's what I just said, yeah.
Thank you, Minister Teixeira. It has been such a pleasure having this really insightful look into your life, your background, the legacy that you're leaving for Guyana to inherit. And I want to thank you for enriching our podcast with your perspectives, your expertise, and you're such a fountain of knowledge. So
I've been around long enough. If you've lived as long as me, you should have some knowledge of what's been going on. But anyway, thank you, and for all your kind words, and allowing me I've used up a lot of your time to say a number of things, because a lot of people don't know life. They don't. And kind of difficult talking about it now. But maybe it's not a bad thing in terms of I have a better perspective, which I may not have had when I was younger. But I think that, so I kind of feel, as I said to you before, kind of embarrassed at why people are interested in me. I just do what I do. But, so thank you for giving me the time, and I used up a lot of your podcast, so I don't know how you're gonna edit it, but good luck.
No,
Thank you.
It has been such a pleasure, and I know that our audience, they truly enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. So thanks
thank
again.
you.
To our audience, thank you for tuning in, and to Ms. Teixeira, as well as all of our women watching this podcast today, we want to extend on behalf of the Starting Point family greetings for a happy International Women's Day. It's such an incredible day to celebrate the accomplishments and to think of all that we have that is still to come. And I hope that you and your loved ones, wherever you might be today, you're enjoying this day to the fullest.
And we should say Happy International Women's Day, because I don't know when this is being aired.
Today. It's
Today?
Sunday,
Okay.
yes. So thank you as well. And this has been your episode of Starting Point. We'll see you next week for more insights from Guyanese leaders. I've been your host, Kiana Wilberg. Take care.
Thanks for watching Starting Point. Follow us on Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn for critical updates and exclusive content.